I'm a hooker. What kind of church is this? Okay, let me get organized.
I don't know, but I like it.
I can't shut him up. When you're a hooker, you get yourself into some interesting situations just by referring to what you do as a hobby. And so when I first started hooking, which was about over 30 years ago, I was influenced by a friend whose name is Judy Phillips, and you're going to hear a lot about her during this talk. And she decided that I should become a hooker, and I had a big wall that needed a big rug on that wall. So my very first rug was a huge one, okay? So I had been hooking a lot, and my shoulder got sore. So I called a doctor, and a sweet little voice answered, and I said, I'm having shoulder problems. I'd really like to make an appointment to come in. And she said, so what do you think caused it? And I said, I'm a hooker. And there was a long pause. And I said, I hook rugs. And she said, oh, thank goodness. So this talk is going to have two parts. The first part is, what is rug hooking? Rug hooking basically is painting with wool. In our house, we have shelves of wool. This is on our lanai, and you can see the stacks of wool that I have there. And this is nothing compared to a lot of my other hooker friends. We just become obsessed with this. And we buy this wool, and it's beautiful. Like that's a typical piece, spot dyed, so that when you hook it, it has different colors in it. And then we cut it into little strips. And these little strips, we have handy little cutters that we use, and we cut them into little strips that look like this. And these are called noodles, or some people call them worms. And Steve says, where I hook, there are so many worms that are around the place. But
all over the floor. Who has to do the vacuuming?
yeah, poor Steve. So these would be my wools that are organized for a particular rug. And so I've got different shades of pink and some purple. And then I'll have about 5 other of these that will have my wools all organized, which makes it easy to pull it through, because all you're doing is pulling these little noodles through a piece of fabric. And this is one that I'm working on right now. And it's, this is just a typical, I have no idea what I'm doing with this. It's just, I needed a project. I use this to keep myself awake at night when I'm watching television. And so I just sit and I hook and I pull these little things through this rug, and you paint with wool. I look and decide what color am I going to go here? Okay, here, here. Okay, let me look at this and this and this. Yes. So you're basically painting with wool. Now there are different levels of hookers. I'm an average hooker. I don't design my own rugs. I don't dye my own wool. I get it that's already printed, and my wool is dyed, but then I pick out the color that I want to go on the rug, and I do the actual hooking. Okay, so one of the rugs that I have in our house is in the bedroom. And it's just dragonflies. And my friend Judy, whom you're going to hear about again, helped me design this, and then I hooked it. And so this is very much a typical rug that you can hook. It's not that hard. It's just fun to do. Okay. The next one, when I moved to Florida, I started hooking when I was in Vermont, in a little town called Waitsfield, but it was next to the mountains. And so everything that I had hooked when I came down here had mountains in it and snow and all. So when I came down here, I had to find some patterns of things that look like Florida. So one of the things that I have is this parrot that is up in my dining room. So that's a hooked rug, just not a complicated pattern. Okay, the next one, Yvette has been fabulous here working on this. Okay, I decided I wanted to do a gecko because we have so many geckos around here. So I had the background for it, and I took that little gecko and I put it down there, and I was going to trace around it. And then I thought, I just like the gecko on there. So I just finished hooking the background, and Steve managed to attach it to the back. So this is just another creative way to use rug hooking, where you look and see what you're going to do. Okay, and then sometimes we actually walk on the rugs. So this is one that's on the floor, and we have no problem walking on them if they're intended to be walked. They don't usually get dirty, but it's nice. It's very colorful. I like this one because it's colorful. Okay, if anyone is interested in learning to hook, we have a well-organized group of hookers in the villages. Of course we do, yes. We meet the first and third Wednesdays at Laurel Manor at 1 o'clock. And on the second and fourth Wednesdays, we meet at Truman. So there's always a group. And if you're interested, you just walk in the door and there's going to be somebody who's going to say, oh, you're a visitor, because we know for regulars, you want to learn to hook. So they'll give you a little frame to practice on, try it out, you know, and then you can decide if you want to keep going or not. So this next picture was in the Valley Sun last week. It's the Daily Sun, yeah. And it's a picture of our group that meets at Laurel Manor. And I'm in the center there holding up my Christmas rug. And Steve posted this on Facebook. My daughter took one look at it and said, of course you're in the middle, Mom. So I said, no, you have to understand. Everybody else had brought their Christmas rugs the week before, and I forgot to bring mine. So that week I decided, oh, what the heck, I'll just bring it this week anyway. So I bring it, and that's the week that the reporter happened to come and was covering it. So, but it's you can see it's a nice big group of people who get together. And if you're also just interested in seeing what everybody else is doing, just come walk around and see what everybody else is working on, because some of them are spectacular. Okay, that's that. Okay, now to the second part of my talk, and this is the most important part. I've told you, I mentioned Judy Phillips is a gifted hooker. You know, I'm average. She is gifted. She designs all of her rugs. She dyes most of her wool. But she's a New England friend, not a Florida friend. About 8 years ago, she came to see us in Maine. I asked what she was working on, and she said, oh, I got it in the back of my trunk. Let me go pull it out and I'll bring it in to you. So she brings it in, and it was the most gorgeous rug with these birds that were all, she had designed it herself. She did not buy a pattern from anybody else. She just took the fabric, drew all these birds on it, and it's the rug that we have in our front entranceway when we come into the sanctuary. So you look at that and you see that is much more spectacular than any of the rugs that I have shown you that I have done. She's just gifted. So I said, oh, and at the bottom of it, it said coexist. And I said, oh, that looks so good in my church. And she said, fine, I'll give it to you. Yeah. So I said, that was great. Now, the reason that she gave it to me is that the wool to hook rugs is really expensive. And every little stitch is small. It takes you a long time to do all of this. And so by the time you finish a rug, you're not going to get the true value if you try to sell it, because most people don't understand what goes into this. So she was looking for somebody to give it to that would serve a good purpose. So I knew I had a treasure when she gave it to me and had to decide how the church could benefit from it financially. I was already in the choir at that time. During the golden years of choir, Tom, when we had a volunteer director, Al Solberg, Nancy's husband, and also a volunteer accompanist, Phyllis Sharp. Phyllis was one of the founding members of this church and was well loved by everyone. However, she became ill and unexpectedly passed away. This happened just as I brought the rug back to Nancy and asked if we could hang it somehow in Phyllis's memory. And this is the rug that I brought back, the one that you see every week when you come into our sanctuary. Nancy almost gasped when she saw it and said that Phyllis had been an avid bird watcher when she was still alive and had traveled the world to see special bird species. We were having a church auction shortly after this, so we came up with a plan. Two of our members at that time, Carol Jackson and Bob Armstrong, both now deceased, each agreed to bid $500 on the rug and then would give it back to the church, which is what they did. So we got $1,000 as a contribution for this. And that is the rug that you see in the entranceway every time that you come in. If you look carefully at some point, think about the fact that Judy drew all of these freehand right on the fabric. All are very different and all getting along. Thus the title, Coexist. She is truly gifted. And she came here when we dedicated it. And some of you old timers will remember when Judy came, because she makes an impression when she walks into the room. She's one of those people. This is Judy when she came down. You can see from her attire that she loves bright colors. So I was thrilled when she was able to come down. So rug hooking is art on many different levels. I will be donating some of my own pillows to our yard sale in February. So don't gasp when there's a hefty price on them. But remember, the cost will be a donation to the church. Okay, here's my. He's cute, isn't he? Okay, I'm done.
These pictures are mine, so don't take mine.
Oh, okay. That's yours. We got our papers mixed up here. There, that's yours.
Okay, let me just hold on to this. Okay, go ahead, I'll give you
Got
the
it?
rest later.
Okay.
And now our next speaker, it's somebody that you have seen. It's somebody that you've heard often here at church. Our music choir director, Tom Zitkovic. Okay, good. I was worried about that. And he's here to talk to us about what he's gone through with some of the things with his music.
Boy, you look so different. I usually see the backs of your heads. There's faces out there. Good morning. I've been here about, I don't know, 3-4 months, I think, November. And I was lucky enough to acquire this job from being friends with Dale Kenton, who said, hey, we got an opening, maybe you can do something. So it worked out very well for me because I was just sitting at home playing for no one. I'm originally from Youngstown, Ohio, and like Jeff, I was an only child. My daughter was an only child, but my father grew up and was in a family of 18 kids. Not all survived because of the problems they had with measles and things like that. My mom had 8 brothers and sisters. And my mom said, we're just going to do one. So, and I did the same thing with my daughter. We just had the one. And I ended up not living in Youngstown for a long time. I went to college there and everything else, and then I just went out on the road. So I started playing at 6 years old. And it happened by accident. My grandfather was a concert violinist, and he bought me a violin when I was 5. And that lasted about 2 months. And my mom also played violin, and she sang with the Youngstown Symphony and with the Pittsburgh Symphony. And I don't know if any of you remember county fairs when they had organ displays and piano displays. Well, there was a gentleman playing an organ. My parents lost me, and the gentleman that was playing ended up taking me to a booth where they announced the name, and he said, hey, we found a little kid standing here watching me play, and that was me. And he took them back to the tent, and my father bought an organ. And I started playing at 6. That gentleman he was a well-known theater organist. He ended up being my teacher up until I was 13. And he got me enrolled in the Dana School of Music, which was Youngstown State University. And I went there until I was 17. And because of the Vietnam War and I didn't want to be drafted, I joined the Air Force. And I came out and went back to the college and finished up. And my major's pipe organ, minor in piano and harpsichord. And then I went back for a minor and a major in jazz arranging, jazz theory, and choir direction. To skip over a bunch of things, I happened to be playing locally, and I was working in the recording studios, and I got a phone call, and the president of the union said, Doc Severinson's in town and he needs a piano player. So naturally I went. And I ended up on the road with him for the next 6 months. And he took me to California, and I was working in the recording studios. And from that, I ended up working with the Beach Boys, Joe Walsh, numerous other bands you know, bands you don't know. And I was known as a backline musician, which I don't know if anybody of you know what that is, that they call them hired guns. We're the guys on the stage that are standing in the back where nobody knows us. And we're playing for the guys in the front who really don't play that well. So when you saw Brian Wilson doing California Girls in the piano part, he was at the piano, but it wasn't plugged in. That was me. I was in the back. And that's pretty much what I did until I got married to my first wife, and we had a daughter. And to make a long story short, we got divorced, and I ended up with custody of my girl, and she was 6 years old at the time. And I had sole custody, so I had to come off the road. So I worked out of Cleveland and worked in the studios, played local bands. I ended up in roller rinks and skating rinks. Now, great job from Nora. You knew it, huh? Yeah, wait till we hear a flea hop later, So I ended up doing that, and from that I ended up at St. Columbus Cathedral and was an assistant choir director and the organist in the church. And that's pretty much the whole story until I met my second wife, who I'm still married to. I think she's watching. If she was able to get on the computer today, she's seeing this. But she happened to be one of the flight attendants for the Hell Freezes Over tour with the Eagles. And that's not where I met her. I met her on a dating site, which that's a longer story. So we lived in Medina, Ohio, and I taught in a studio, and I was teaching gifted children, children with special needs, a lot of autistic children, Downs, and also the kids that were older that were going to go for their senior recitals for college to go and graduate. And in that, I ended up teaching adults, which were also very gifted. So I taught all that time, and then my mom got dementia, which is why we moved here. And we took care of her for, I think it was almost 4 years. My father passed away, then she passed away, and we're still here. And now my wife's taking care of me, but what happened is coming to this church kind of started my life again. Because during the pandemic, I had quit playing in the local bands. I was playing on the squares, so some of you may have seen me in some of the bands. And I ended up doing nothing and just sitting around the house. And I was working at a golf course on a golf cart as an ambassador and having all you villagers yell at me. And it was just, and I just, when Dale came up and told me about this was perfect. And you have no idea what you've done for me. More so than what I do for you. Thank you. And I'd like to thank the people that donated the organ that's over there. And it was Dale, Kenton, and his wife, and Nancy. And was there anyone else? I think that was it. So I ended up with an organ because I'm a piano player. I'm actually an organist. Pianist was like Justin was a pianist. I just play the piano. And that's pretty much my whole story. So thank you for having me, and thank you for bringing me here. Oh, there's one more thing. During the pandemic, I started a YouTube site because I had nothing to do. So on the piano, there's a business card. If you flip it over, my YouTube site's on there, and there's a ton of videos of all kinds of things that I did. I'm still adding to them, and now I'm going to start adding some of the stuff that I do here in the church. So if you're interested, you can pick a card up and you can find me on YouTube. I'm on Facebook. Thank you.
Thank you, Helena, and thank you, Tommy, for that wonderful introduction. And I'd like to thank everyone for welcoming me into the Unitarian family. It's really been appreciative very much. Well, to ask an older man to speak about his life is really inviting trouble. I mean, let's face it. You want me to grandpa-splain? I guess I can. But anyway, be that as it may, I've always loved culture. I don't know what it is. How do you define it? The customs, the artifacts, how people speak and all this stuff. Well, a little bit about my background. And I'd like to talk about some of the people in my family that led me to developing my worldview. And I think, I think everyone has a similar story, perhaps. And also why it led to a love of movies. I think everyone here loves movies, Who doesn't love a movie? I think people like culture. I mean, I think that's why we're here. People travel a lot. Everyone's got their stories about that. It really starts with my family. I'm an only child. My son's an only child. My son Duncan. I'm an only child. My mother was an only child until she was 15. Her mother was an only child. And my great-grandmother had 2 brothers and a sister. So we're not talking about, it's spring break in the villages and you have 40 people visiting you. I mean, I have no one visiting me. So, I come here, so that's where I get my family fixed. But, so I guess I'd like to just start the talk about, I was riding around 466 and 441. I was just asking myself, I said, well, yeah, I could talk about movies till the cows come home. I could, talk about my love of YouTube videos. I watched one the other day on Moldova. I watched one on Dublin, if you're in Dublin, remember to thank the bus driver. So there you go, that's a cultural thing. But each one is very, very interesting. But I've also been I wouldn't say indifferent to culture. I've never appropriated it. I never say, well, gee, I want to be, an Australian cowboy or something, or a South Sea Islander or something. I've always appreciated it, but I've always sort of been distant. Something like an anthropologist in my attitude, or a documentarian if you put it in film language. So I'd like to go back. Everyone buckle in. We'll go back in the Wayback Machine, and I'd like to talk about the 3 women in my life: my great-grandmother, my mother, and my grandmother as well, and where they came from, their journey, because I think their journey led to my journey, which led me here. So I'll tell you a little bit about it. So let's go back in time to the early 1900s to Griffin, Georgia, which I heard quite a bit about. My great-grandmother is Grace Morris. Nanny was a quarter Cherokee Indian, and 3/4 Scotch-Irish. They had immigrated from Northern Ireland. The family did. One of the brothers, married a Indian woman, and out popped the rest of the family. Well, anyway, there we are. We're in Griffin, Georgia. It's a lovely day in Griffin, Georgia, on the farm. And there's my great-grandmother, Grace, pregnant with my grandmother. She pops out, Leslie. She marries a guy in the Navy. They decide to hit the road in the Navy, right? You travel in the Navy. They wind up in New York. Her husband, Carson, though, unfortunately dies when they get to New York. So she's got there's a lot of gumption in the family. So she, as she does in the 1920s, she's very pretty. She dresses up like a flapper and all that stuff. And there's actually pictures of her. And she goes to a dance, right? So at the dance, Grace meets a young World War I vet, Harry London. Harry was a Jewish boxing promoter from Chicago. They had no idea. They're in New York. He's a Jewish boxing promoter from Chicago, wherever that is, right? And they don't even know. So they ask each other. They never met anyone who was Jewish. He was secular, and they were secular. I mean, there was no religion, really. So they made a marriage, as they say in Brooklyn. They made a good marriage, right? So so that worked out great. So money's coming in. Finally, money's coming in. Now you hit the Great Depression. Now it's time for Leslie to get married. So my grandmother does the same thing her mother did. She goes to a dance. She gets all prettied up, and she meets a young, first-generation Italian song and dance man from vaudeville, Giorgio Vegna. Peg of my heart, I love you, don't let us part, all that stuff. And he's a professional dancer of all things. And even though I have 2 left feet, I didn't get that gene. But, all is good. It's the Depression. You got 2 men working. Also, money's coming in, right? It's beautiful. They're living in Washington Heights in a tenement, one above the other. And, life is bearable, right? Unfortunately, Giorgio lasted 2.5 years. So he died. Okay, nothing's going to stop these women. Wow. Nothing's going to stop them. They just keep going. So let's fast forward to the 50s. All of a sudden, my grandmother, she's at it again. She's not going to give up. So she goes to a dance, and there she meets a Cuban immigrant, Angel Abreu, or Angel Abreu, but he was, he's like a lot of immigrants, Joe American, right? So he came to America to play baseball for Rider College in New Jersey, where he got an accounting degree. So he had a good job. He was a bookkeeper, and they marry. And now you have my mother, and they're all living in Brooklyn in a house together, and all that kind of stuff. And it worked out great. So all of a sudden, who's the last woman to you got to get married. You got to find a fella. So that was my mother's turn, right? So my mother's 17 years old, and all of a sudden a handsome Canadian, actually. His family came from Canada, and they were in New York. He was in the Korean War. He was a Marine. Bob, the Bobster. Well, anyway, he winks at my mom. He's 24, she's 17, they get married. They're married for about a year. out IPOP in 1958. And, you're dealing with strong women. So after 7 months later, my mother throws him down a flight of stairs, kicks his ass out of the house. Goodbye, Bob. See you later. Bob unfortunately came back from Korea with a heroin habit, and my mother wasn't going to put up with it. So, she's a very strong woman. So she, here is 19 years old. I was born blind in one eye, and there's no stopping them. So they, I don't know. It's like, you stir these things up, and I guess it stirs up emotions as well. But no, they just, nothing got in their way. I mean, they were very stoic. I mean, there was, part of it was they were not of any particular culture. They just, there was this Georgian thing that never left. We celebrated Passover and Easter. I mean, their idea of Passover and Easter is serving fried chicken, collard greens, and cornbread. I mean, that was pretty much it. They had a dogwood tree in the backyard. They had a rose bush. My great-grandmother still spoke with a very syrupy... 1 minute? Okay, we gotta get going. Okay. Yeah, we gotta get going. So anyway, so that's sort of the environment that I grew up in. And the one thing that they taught me was, not to judge people, they never judged anyone, and they didn't expect me to judge anyone. So I kind of took that love of culture that I grew up in, and brought it to the movie group here and to the AA congregation. So I'd like to thank everyone. If you get a chance, watch movies. Movies are great. They're a window to the world. They're also a window to the soul. Thank you.